everybody. We're back today with astrologer John Sandbach. He is going to be talking to us about his experience being an astrologer. He has lots of experience, 56 years to be exact, which is a remarkable amount of time. I really am in awe of this amount of time spent doing this. So if you want to say hey and
Hi, it's great to be here. And of course, I have a Leo ascendant, so I don't have any trouble talking about myself.
This is good because I have, it's all about you. So it's good. I guess to start out, I want to ask, what got you interested in astrology in the first place? Like, what was a spark that got you interested and all of that?
I remember reading some astrology, a magazine or something, and just thinking, I want to do that. I want to learn how to do that. I want to know more about that. And so I started out by trying to figure out how to drop charts. What a nightmare. If you don't have anybody to teach you how to do that, you're trying to learn that on your own. Well, so first of all, it was even hard at that time. This was in like 1966. It was hard to even get an ephemeris. So I live in Kansas City, and Kansas City has Linda Hall Library, which is one of the biggest science libraries in the world. And I went over there and got an astronomical ephemeris, I think put out by the US government. And I think the first chart I drew up, it took about 8 hours to draw it up because I couldn't figure out like how to do it. And I kept rereading it. And is this right? So I was so relieved when computers showed up and you could just push buttons and there was a chart. It was great.
How old were you when you first?
Around 18.
Around 18.
And after I'd been doing it for about a year, I had a very good friend who was she was a hippie is what she was, but she was born into a socialite family in Kansas City. So she knew all these rich people. And she was talking to one of her female friends on the phone one day. And the friend said, well, John, can you do my chart? And I said, well, I can draw it up. And she said, well, can you tell me about myself and what's in it? And I said, well, I never done that before. She said, oh, well, just try. And I said, well, okay. So I got that book, Horoscope Maker and Delineator by Llewellyn George. Are you familiar with that book?
Sounds familiar.
It's a big, huge, fat book, and it has in it planets and signs and planets and houses and on and on and on. So I drew up her chart and I wrote out things from the book that, kind of like what planets and signs and houses meant and like that, and gave it to her and charged her $15. And so then I ended up doing all these like upper class socialite charts in Kansas City for people around that age for $15 each. So that's how I got started doing astrology.
So you kind of got in somehow, were able, that almost feels like Jupiter luck there, being able to like get in to a circle
exactly
with people that actually had money to pay for this, even though back then, now that would be a lot more than
oh yeah, $15 back then was about probably $75.
Yeah. But there is like a lucky of even just like having that contact that could then put you in contact with people that had the money to pay for this and were interested in it.
Exactly. Exactly. And I carried on for many years, just doing astrology like on my own. And really for many years, that was my sole source of income. Mm-hmm. And it kind of blows my mind that I made that work.
Yeah.
And I would keep lists of people who had readings from me before, and then I would call them up on the phone and say, would you like me to do a forecast chart for you for a year? And I got about an 80% return on that. People would say yes. So I kept doing my phone calling to get business and And back then I was writing out all my charts. And then I typed them, and then I would do 10 typewritten pages. And really, Ellie, I'm sure I did over 1,000 charts that way. That's 10,000 typewritten pages. So
I understand, I mean, I do a lot of, I would say about half my work is on Zoom or over the phone, but the other half are written reports.
oh wow.
If I were to and I mean, from scratch, nothing, and
Yeah.
I'm like, it makes me want to go back through and look and see how many fucking pages I've done.
Oh yeah. No, I'm sure there's a lot of them.
There probably is.
I think there's very few astrologers that do that.
Yes.
Write out.
That's what I found. But I've also found that people they like to be able to, you know what I mean? Like they do some, not everybody, but some people do. They really like to be able to have it written to save or.
Oh yeah. Oh, it's great because you can really go back and look at it,
Yes. I think that's cool that you did it like that. It wasn't just strictly in person or over the phone. I think that makes me feel less alone in the way that I do things.
Oh yes. No, it's great. It's inconvenient and it's work to write things down. But when you do it for people, it's wonderful. I think they really appreciate it. I'll tell you one story. There was a guy I had known for a long time, and he had just had a child. And he said, there was a male child, and he said, would you write out their birth interpretation? And I said, yes. And this was not that long ago. I mean, it wasn't at the very beginning of my work, but it was later. And so I wrote out this baby's chart, and like about 17 years later, that person came to me and he said, I just want to thank you. My parents took astrology seriously, and you really helped them to raise me. And they were very supportive of what I really needed, which they got from the chart. And he said, everything you said in the chart was like really, really accurate. And it's just really helped me a lot. And that made me so happy,
Yeah, that sort of work is so rewarding. But when you've got parents that have children and they really want to consciously parent their child in a way that fits the child, you know what I mean? And
right, rather than a cookie cutter.
Yeah, because everybody's different. Everybody has different ways that they need to be guided. Yeah, it is very rewarding. I bet that was just like, I bet your heart was just singing when you got that call from them. I bet.
Oh, it was great.
When you did you primarily stay in Kansas City area, like as far as like
yes.
work went?
Yes. And I'll say it, I'm going to reveal myself here, but I think it's important for understanding who I am. There's an astrologer that died rather recently, Debbie Kempton Smith. She wrote a book called Secrets from a Stargazer's Notebook. I really liked her a lot. And she said that there are certain things she thinks that dominate a chart, that will come to dominate the whole chart. Okay. And the one that she mentioned was Moon in Capricorn.
Oh yeah.
She felt like Moon in Capricorn it can be difficult and challenging, that it tends to dominate a whole chart. I think another one that can dominate. Do you have Moon in Capricorn?
I do.
You do.
That's why I laugh.
Oh, how interesting. How interesting. Do you feel like it's dominated your chart?
Yeah. I feel like it does. I mean, okay, I've got a lot of stuff in Sagittarius, right?
Right.
And I've got the 12th house sun. So, but I am very reality focused too. And I do feel like it, and I also have got Saturn conjunct the ascendant. So I do realize there is a gravity to me as it is. But yes, I do feel like the Moon in Capricorn is a critical part of my chart. Yeah.
Yes.
Uh-huh.
Yeah.
That's funny though that you.
It is funny. Yes. It's almost as funny as the tomato thing, which we won't go into. Okay. But another thing I feel like that really will come to dominate a chart is a hard aspect, like conjunction, opposition, or square between Moon and Neptune.
Yes, I could, yes.
And my moon Neptune conjunction has been something that has been very, very difficult for me to deal with. And I would say that the happiest part of my whole life is right now. And the reason is because of having dealt with that moon Neptune. But one of the things that moon Neptune did was afraid of the outside world, afraid to walk down the street, really agoraphobic.
Really?
And so at your age, I would have loved to have gone to astrology conventions and go to different cities and lecture and like that. No way in the world I could have done that. Way too paranoid.
Huh. I was also gonna say with Moon Neptune though, the channeling, does that play?
Oh yeah, absolutely.
I feel like so it's kind of like, it almost feels like it would be a blessing and a curse in that sense. Like,
Exactly. Yeah. Yeah, because the moon and Neptune, I pick up on vibes like mad. I soak them in like a sponge.
yeah.
The problem is we're living in a world that has a lot of toxic vibes. So you better be squeezing out that sponge real frequently.
That almost feels like it almost feels like the understatement of the year, because there's so much toxic. There's so much.
Oh yeah.
It's
Yeah.
almost like you have to, like, it's like sludge. You have to like clean it up. And it's like,
Exactly.
even when you clean it out, there's more of it. It's like, just get the fuck off me.
Exactly. Exactly. Yes.
When do you feel like the, I know you said the best part of your life has been right now, but when do you feel like the being agoraphobic, when do you feel like that ended?
Well, I'll tell you a funny story about that. I was blessed by drawing to myself a couple of really, really good therapists.
Mhm.
And they're the ones that really helped me through the whole thing. And I used to be like, I didn't want to go into a grocery store because there were too many colors and it was too complicated and everything was like overwhelming.
Mhm.
I just felt overwhelmed and then I'd get paranoid. I finally figured that the way to go grocery shopping is wear sunglasses
Okay.
because that just cut down the stimulus, sort of thing.
So yeah,
Uh,
it kind of manifested in like just, yeah, being overly, the senses being overly stimulated yeah.
Yes, and crowds would be really bad. I would have panic attacks in a big crowd. So one night after I had gone through all this therapy, a friend and I went to a barbecue place that was inside a casino in Kansas City, and it was Saturday night, and we were sitting there eating barbecue out in the open in this casino, and it was filled with people and all those machines were making noise and there was just a roar of just noise. And I thought to myself, I'm healed because I'm totally cool. I'm sitting here eating my barbecue and I don't feel like running out of the building,
That had
So
that had to have felt amazing to know, like, I've got this, I can do this, I'm okay.
exactly. And two, with that, when you're real psychically sensitive like that, another thing you want is to always be setting up psychic barriers, psychic protections. That's really important.
That's why I do a lot of this.
That's great. Oh yeah,
um
that's wonderful.
I always have it, yeah, I like to protect with smoke and fire. So
Yes.
I know, how do you like to do that to protect too?
I use Bach flower remedies. I'm really into those.
Cool.
Yeah. Walnut is a real good one for protection.
So you go more of the earth route of.
Yes.
I know there are like different routes people can take to do this.
Oh yeah, definitely. That's a beautiful thing about psychic protection. There's a woman named Dion Fortune that wrote a book on psychic self-protection. That's a great book.
What is it called? Psychic self-protection?
I think so. Yeah.
I'll have to look
Yes.
at that. Sounds cool. Sounds like something I would be interested in.
It's a neat book.
Very cool. Okay, who are your biggest influences, or who have been the biggest influences astrologically or otherwise? Because I know that you also write poetry, and who have been your biggest your biggest influences?
In the realm of astrology, Mark Edmund Jones.
Okay.
You're familiar with him at all?
Yes.
Yeah. Well, I just read his books almost to the point of wearing the print off the page. I would go over and over them. And so I learned his system of doing charts. And in my book, I wrote a book called Manual of Astrology.
Mm-hmm.
And actually, that book is going to be greatly expanded and redone, adding Paul Swan as another author to it. And then we've actually talked about seeing if you would write some stuff for it too, about the Galactic Center. We just want it to be a big manual of astrology with just chock full of neat things, you know.
I would be honored.
Oh, great. That would be wonderful. But there's one problem with Mark Jones, and that is that he is a truly crappy writer. He's too intellectual. His sentences are too long. They're awkward. He uses big words, and sometimes it's hard to figure out what he's even saying. So I had to slog through all that. A lot of people just won't read his books because of that. But he really helped me to have a systematic way of applying astrology. And then my next biggest, maybe person that affected me was Ray Merriman.
Okay.
And he started a publishing company called Seek It Publications.
Okay.
And he published my first book on astrology. And Ray was always very, very supportive of me. He's just a wonderful person and a wonderful astrologer. And there's many astrological ideas I got from him. He put me onto good things, many different good things.
Cool.
And then somewhat Dane Rudyard, but Dane Rudyard's kind of like a little too abstract and intellectual and that kind of thing. So really Ray Merriman more than anything. And, you know, probably what I've learned astrologically, I've learned mainly from talking to other astrologers. You know, when I would finally get up the nerve to go to an astrology convention, it was so interesting meeting other people. I'm going to be really blunt about something too.
Okay.
And what it is I think there's two types of astrologers.
Okay.
There's a type that puts astrology first, and the other type is they put themselves first. In other words, it's all about kind of ego and things like that.
Yes.
And I met both types at the conventions.
Which conventions have you been? Which ones have you been to?
The most memorable one was one in New Orleans.
Oh, okay.
It's funny you mentioned New Orleans to me earlier. Then I would go to the Ray Merriman conventions, which were always in Michigan.
Okay.
And I went to one time in California. I went to an ESAR convention in Atlanta.
Okay.
So.
Which ones, if you don't mind me asking, just because I haven't actually been to a convention, I would love to do that.
You really ought to do that. Yeah.
Okay. Which ones do you think had a collective of people that put astrology first more than their ego first? Because I do wonder or is it kind of a mixed bag all over the place?
Ray Merriman.
Okay.
His conventions, because he would handpick the people and he knew the people. So he'd always pulled together a great group of people.
Cool.
Yeah. And I probably met the biggest number of well-known astrologers at his convention. In fact, Debbie Kempton Smith, the woman that talked about, you know, Capricorn, moon dominating a chart and moon Neptune dominating a chart. The way I've met her was I was at the convention and everybody talking at the convention, we had to get up and say something about ourselves and what we were going to present. Mm-hmm. So I sat down in the audience right beside her. And she was a very attractive person and she was wearing a beautiful Chanel suit. and she just looked wonderful.
Mm-hmm.
And she was like sitting there just nervous and jittery because she was a very, I think, an introverted sort of person, you know?
Mm-hmm.
And she says, I'm nervous about getting up and talking. And I said, well, do you want to hold my hand? And she said, sure, yeah. And so I held her hand and I could tell it was kind of grounding her,
Uh-huh.
you know? And then when she got up to talk, she was great. I mean, she did a wonderful job, but she just wasn't used to that, you know, at that time.
Yeah. And that, I'm sure if you're not used to that or you've never done it before, it's probably very scary. I would probably be real scared. So
Oh yeah. Just play like you're doing a Zoom meeting.
that's a good thing to keep in mind.
Yeah.
Okay. And again, I know you told me how to pronounce this before, but I know.
Oh, the Dwada Shamsas.
Yeah. I don't know if I fucked that right on up. So I'm just gonna let you pronounce that. That was your first book.
Yes.
How long did it take you to write that? And what was the process like for you writing that? And talk a little bit about that if you want.
Okay. So the Dwada Shamsas are when you divide a sign into 12 parts. Mm-hmm. And each part then is 2.5 degrees. And there's an astrologer named Carl Payne Toby, who wrote a famous book on astrology. I can't think of what the title is, but if you Google Carl Payne Toby, it'll come up. And he had a system whereby the first Dwada Shamsa of a sign is subruled by the other sign corresponding with the planet that rules that sign. So for instance, if you take Gemini, mm-hmm. he had the first Dwada Shamsa of Gemini as subruled by Virgo.
Okay.
Because both Gemini and Virgo are ruled by Mercury. Mm-hmm. So, and then he put the sun moon together. So the first Dwada Shamsa of Cancer is ruled by Leo. Okay. And the first Dwada Shamsa of Leo is ruled by Cancer. So that system fascinated me. And I just decided I was going to try to write out meanings for each one of those little sections. There's 144 of them. And so I started doing that. And I felt like I was kind of, really the book was channeled to a very great degree. Was it? You know, because I would get into writing and it would just be going, you know, on having momentum. And I'm thinking, I don't even know exactly what I'm doing, but I'm just trying to feel into putting together the meanings of these two signs, you know, one influencing the other. And so I got that book written. One of the most painful stories of my astrology career is I sent it off to Samuel Weiser in New York, the book. Uh-huh. And Donald Weiser, who was the head of the company at that time, his father, I think, had founded it. Big company in New York. He told me, he said, we got your book. He said, there's a problem. He said, he says, everything we publish is by deceased authors from the past. He says, we don't publish any new things. Oh. But he says, we've been thinking about expanding our line. Uh-huh. So we're going to consider your book. So then later I talked to him on the phone and he said, I read your book. I really like it. And we're considering it. I'm telling you, I was over the moon. I was so excited just because Samuel Weiser is a very prestigious publishing company. Well, guess what? After months, they refused it. And I was just, you know, let down. So then one day out of the clear blue, Ray Merriman called me. And at this point, I didn't know him that well, but I had been to one of his conventions. Okay. And he said, he knew that I was trying to get that book published by Samuel Weiser. And he said, did they ever take it? And I said, no. And he said, well, I'm starting a publishing company and I want to publish your book. I was so happy. It was
I bet you were.
Yeah. So that's how that first book got to be published.
That's very, it sounds like it found a good home with where it ended up too. Like it.
Yes, exactly.
Everything kind of, even though that process was painful and like a letdown, it did end up where where it should be, you know.
Yeah. Now, that according to Mark Jones, one thing that makes that Jupiter in my chart powerful is that it's the only planet in the whole western half of the chart.
Yes.
And he said that, so that really empowers it. Not only, I mean, being in its ruling sign and being conjunct to galactic center and all these things. But now I'm going to tell you a little story about the negative side of Jupiter. So I wrote another book called Astrology, Alchemy, and the Tarot, and Ray Merriman published it.
Okay.
So I was at a convention and I was talking to Ray, and I said, well, I want to, I'm thinking about what topics would you like me to write on that you would publish my book? And he looked at me and he said, I will publish anything you write. You write whatever you want to write and I'll publish it. Well, that of course made me very happy. What I should have done was stop just about everything and write. Just really write what I wanted to write, do it.
Yeah.
Oh no, my Jupiter? No, I'm into thousands of things. And one of the things I'm into doing is drinking and carousing. I don't drink anymore now at all. I haven't had any alcohol for many years. But back then, oh yeah, I'd love to go party and drink. And, I was a very social sort of person. And to make a long story short, I didn't get that much more written, but he did publish another book of mine, a big book on planetary containments. And then I wrote a book on harmonics. And that was another sad story because they got that book. I wrote the book on harmonics. They got it edited. And then they finally sent me a letter saying, we are stopping the publishing company. It's going to end. All that publishing company is going to do now is sell the books it has and reprint them. We are ceasing to publish anything new from anyone.
Oh, that sucks.
Yeah, and it was really because Ray was very busy doing other things. He didn't have the time.
Yeah.
And they sent me back the manuscript of the harmonics book, fully edited. There it is in my lap, no publisher. And it wasn't until many years later that finally it came out on Kindle.
Yeah, because I was going to say, I did notice on your website that it did appear that it does exist. Like you can.
It does.
Yes.
Yeah, on Kindle. Yes. Okay. And then, so I'm having a book that's going to be published next year by Inner Traditions, and it's a book on the tarot.
Okay.
And I'm hoping that Inner Traditions possibly will publish the harmonics book. I don't know if they will or not, but we'll see.
Have you sent it to them? Do they know about, like, have you asked, or are you waiting to see kind of?
Well, waiting to see. I have a contact person at Inner Traditions, and he's told me about another book I wrote. He said, I wrote out what's called the pitch for the book, which is the proposal. And he said, well, John, I'm going to wait until the right time, and then I'm going to submit this proposal. So I really trust this guy. He's really good. He'll wait for the right time and he'll do it. But it's not yet. So
how, I published, me and my partner that did the star cards. We've tossed around ideas about trying to find an actual publisher for it. But it seems like a club that is hard to get into. So I'm always.
Are you ever right about that? And it's really scary. You send them a manuscript and they'll have this. I've heard stories, this is true. They'll have a desk with this big stack of manuscripts on it, and they'll just set yours on top. And then every once in a while, they'll look through and pull out one and leaf through it and think about maybe publishing it or whatever, or put it back on the stack,
Yeah, it seems like it's a hard, I mean, we just went ahead and we just self-published it, but but yeah, it seems like it is a hard thing to get into.
It's terrible. No, the way I got into with inner traditions was like a miracle. And what it was like they published Elias Lonsdale's book.
Okay.
And Inner Traditions does a thing where they are not Inner Traditions, but Simon and Schuster, which is the company that owns Inner Traditions. They have a self-publishing thing that they'll help you with. So I got in touch with them and got set up with an appointment. And I talked to the man and I said, how do I submit this book to Inner Traditions? And he said, your best bet is if you have an in. He said, you said that one astrologer, Elias Lonsdale, has published a book with them. He said, get in touch with Elias and see if he'll recommend you.
Okay. So so it's, so that your stuff is actually seen when it.
Yeah. And so what I did was I called Elias and I said, will you recommend my book to be published by them? And he said, absolutely.
That's awesome.
So then within 2 days, he set me up with this. He set me up. His contact called me and said, go ahead and submit the proposal. And within a couple of weeks, they had accepted the book.
That's fast. That seems like.
Oh, yeah. Oh, it was. It was just like, yeah. So you got to get on their radar somehow. That's the thing. But you're doing it the right way in terms of social media. That's going to really up your, you need visibility. And in this day and age, it's a podcast and the Zoom meetings and Instagram and TikTok and things like that. That's what gets you the visibility.
Yeah. For a long time, I operated more behind the scenes. It was just Reddit.
Right.
We were just Reddit where nobody could see me. I had my little, and I still creep on Reddit. I still function on Reddit, but for a long time. And then I realized, okay, I probably actually need to put my face.
Yeah.
That does help. Just the visibility.
Yes. Well, and you just come across great,
Well, that's good. Sometimes I think I probably come across like I'm crazy, but that's okay too.
Well, but that's interesting. And that's what's important, is to be interesting. Yeah. Yes. According to the mainstream world, we are crazy, but we're harmless. It's okay.
Yeah, we're kind of crazy.